please, with a moment of silent reflection. Roll call, please, Mrs. Galante.
Mrs. Fee?
Here.
Mr. DeRose?
Here.
Mr. Croner?
Here.
Mr. Meyer?
He is excused.
Mrs. Muehlfeld? Mrs. Randall?
Here.
And Mrs. Weber?
Here.
You missed, I'm sorry.
I'd like to read a statement to begin the meeting, please. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff, members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with members or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Is there anyone present who would like to speak to the board at this time on a non-agenda item? If so, please come to the mic and give your name and address. Seeing none, we will proceed. I would like to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. And before we begin, is there anyone on the board who would like to separate an item on the consent agenda for separate action? Seeing none, is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Mrs. Randall, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Okay, board members, we will take a vote. Please roll call.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. DeRose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes. Mrs. Fee, would you read the recognition?
Yes. The National Center for Safe Routes to School awarded McKinley Elementary School with one of just 26 $1,000 mini grants designed to support projects that encourage students and their families to walk or bicycle safely to school. Schools, municipalities, and organizations from across the country will receive the grants during the 2011-2012 school year, spring semester. McKinley Elementary School seeks to expand its walking school bus program by reaching out to local community members, businesses, and 3 nearby universities. This grant award reflects the dedication of McKinley staff and families. Sarah Lorand, McKinley parent, along with other parents, Mark Carter, McKinley principal, and Jeff Rosnowski, McKinley District Alderman, have all been instrumental in promoting safe routes to school. This partnership between the City of Wauwatosa and the Wauwatosa School District is essential in providing safe travel for our students.
Board members, any questions or comments on this? I have one, Dr. Earle. Do you know if this will begin to address some of the questions and concerns that have been presented to us with respect to the McKinley young people that go to West High School and there's concern about safe routes? Do you know if this will possibly address some of those concerns?
I don't know if this will address the concerns about traveling to west from the McKinley area, but I think it's generally in that McKinley area. But I know there's concerns throughout the city about safe routes, and working with the city, we're going to be doing a traffic study in the Madison area and the Eisenhower Whitman West area, so hopefully some of that can be addressed as well through safe routes.
The only thing I would ask if we could be kept informed, because I think this is a great opportunity for us and certainly grateful for it, but if you wouldn't mind just keeping us informed as we move along. Business services, please, Mr. Croner.
Thank you, Mrs. Weber. It is recommended that the school board amend the approved 2011-2012 budget. Changes are summarized as follows. 1. Amending the 2011-2012 school district budget. Whereas Chapter 65, Paragraph 90, Sub 5, Sub A, Wisconsin statutes requires the school board by a 2/3 vote of the entire membership to approve alterations made to the previously adopted 2011-2012 budget. And whereas the school board adopted a 2011-2012 budget on October 24th, 2011, now therefore be it resolved that the school board does hereby make the following alterations to the 2011-2012 expenditure budget. Under description, other non-program transactions, category 490000, previously approved at $30,000, adjusted to $2,082,000 for a revised budget amount of $2,112,000. And general fund 10 total, $69,947,285, adjustment of $2,082,000 to a revised budget amount of $72,029,285. And I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fee. Board members, discussion?
Mrs.
Question?
Weber, if I could
Yes,
just make a
please.
couple of comments. I think the discussion at the last meeting, we discussed a little bit related to the levy, and this is the chargeback for the Wheaton Franciscan lawsuit with the city. This action that we're asking the board to take does not relate to eliminating or taking any kind of levy authority. That is something that the board will have to make a decision on in relationship to the budget process for next year for that $2.1 million. So the board is not giving up levy authority by approving this. This is simply just a budget adjustment to make that payment that needs to be made. But I think later on that discussion, the board is going to have related to that levy authority that is still there for this amount. And we're doing more research to find out whether or not that's a one-year levy or if it can be spread out over several years. So trying to see if there's more options for the board. But ultimately, this decision is solely on making the payment so we can adjust the budget to make that payment out of fund balance.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions, please? Mrs. Randall?
Just a couple of things, please. The non-program transactions, previously approved $30,000. That doesn't show a to and from account? Or the account that this is coming from, is there a current balance available for that?
Is there a balance to and from? I'm not understanding.
I'm sorry. We're approving $2,082,000.
Right.
Mr. Mack, would you mind please coming to the front, because I don't know if the camera can pick it up from there. Thank you. Okay.
So that's coming from Fund 49.
No. This is coming from the general fund. It's just a tax chargeback.
Okay.
That 490,000 is actually a function. I have to put that legally when we make a budget change. That's the program number, and that's just a function in the accounting sequence. It has nothing to do with the fund. It's a general fund. When the city, what the city does is when they want to do a chargeback, they actually certify it with the state, Wisconsin Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue sends us the actual invoice. The invoice is then paid to the city, and then we're able to re-levy for that if the board would decide to do that. There's no other way to go around that. The city can't levy for that amount themselves. They have to certify that amount with the state of Wisconsin, and we have to pay it back to the city.
Okay.
That's just the way it works. We have this every year. It's just that we normally don't see anything ever close to this amount.
Okay. I thought it was going into Fund 10, not
No.
coming out of Fund 10. So I must be reading this wrong. I better look at it again. So previously approved 69 million, revised budget 72 million. So the 2 million is not going into fund?
Right. The
Yeah.
2 million is just, actually, we're gonna pay that out of fund balance is what we're gonna do. But that's just an adjustment simply because that dollar amount was so big, that chargeback, and I didn't know about it when we approved the budget in October.
Okay. Is there a balance available for our fund balance then after this transaction?
Well, in the short run, we can do it. We couldn't do it permanently, but we do need to replenish that fund balance for cash flow purposes. It's going to be whether the board decides as a policy decision to levy back that money. And I am trying to find out if we can do it over a number of years or we have to do it just over next year. And that decision will have to be made in the next few months before we pass the next budget.
Okay, and then we have to pay this amount by February 1st or beginning of February, is that correct?
It's actually due by like Valentine's Day.
Okay, and are we paying the city of Wauwatosa or are we paying Wheaton Franciscan?
Have we paid them yet?
Who is getting this money?
Oh, yeah, it's the city of Wauwatosa.
The city of Wauwatosa?
Right.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Droz?
I just want to make sure I have this right. So this is money that was previously levied and incorrectly applied by the city of Wauwatosa based on a lawsuit that they lost, and now the district's going to pay back the city of Wauwatosa?
Yes, it's kind of the way the process works. Whenever there's a tax chargeback, in other words, the city, it wants to, it's not just us, it's also the Milwaukee County and MATC.
Right.
They actually say that somebody either didn't pay or they certified the levy incorrectly. In this case, the pie was divvied up incorrectly.
By the city of Wauwatosa?
Right.
But
So
we're
the
being
city of
expected to
Wauwatosa
make it
had
right.
to pay Covenant back up front.
Right.
And then they have the authority to certify with the state of Wisconsin to tax the underlying jurisdictions, which we're one of. So then we get an invoice, already received it from the state of Wisconsin, I believe it's Department of Revenue, for that amount, but it's payable to the city of Wauwatosa to pay them back, but it had to be certified by the state. But there was no way that I know of that the city could have said, no, we're not gonna certify that and not charge the school district.
I just want to make it clear that we didn't have anything to do with not getting this money. It
We
was
didn't.
levied, it was supposed to be paid.
Our levy was always correct.
Right.
It's always correct.
This is
It's a
something that
matter
the city of
of,
Wauwatosa did and it didn't pay
something
out.
that the city did in this case where they deemed Covenant to be a taxable entity, and the lawsuit that was finally resolved by the Wisconsin Supreme Court deemed them non-taxable. So in whatever number of years, 8 or 9 years that the city taxed Covenant, the pie would have been smaller because Covenant would have been out of there.
Right.
And everybody else would have paid $2 to $20 or whatever dollars more per year in taxes. And because they didn't, now we have to re-tax for that money.
The school board has to re-tax.
You have to make a decision on that.
So we end up being the heavy
Right.
to make up for an error by the city of Wauwatosa, basically.
Yeah, it's if you want to consider it an error. I mean, there are cases.
Well, the money's been paid out. We asked for the money.
Right.
Funds, services have been delivered for those funds, and now they lost a lawsuit, and we got to make good on their assumptions,
Right, that is true.
incorrect assumptions. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Mack. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to question or make comment on this item? Seeing none? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. Droz?
No.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes. If we may move on, please, to student services. Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Thank you. It is recommended that the school board approve revisions to policy 5330, administration of medications, to bring the district into compliance with Wisconsin statute 118.29 sub 6, as presented and discussed at the January 9th, 2012 meeting. And I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Croner. Discussion, board members? Dr. Earl, do you have any comment on this?
Nothing to add, just
Oh.
getting us in compliance, which we seem to bring a number of policies forward that due to state law changes. We're adjusting.
Thank you. Audience, any questions? Seeing none, roll call vote?
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. Gerose?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes. At this time, we will like to introduce Kathy Eli, who is president of the EFW. Ms. Eli, would you please come forward? And if you'd like to introduce any of your members of your EFW, please introduce them also.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Eli, and I'm the president of the Education Foundation, and attending this evening is also Andrea Gaines, one of our board members. And we're here this evening just to take a brief moment of your time to give you an update on what the Education Foundation has been doing. The organization's over 20 years old, and it's run fairly independently with a focus very independently, with a focus on providing grants to individual classroom teachers. And that's the way the focus has been for the 20 years. Well, about a year ago, we had numerous discussions within the board about the fact that education has changed dramatically in those 20 years, and the needs for support have changed dramatically as well. And so we had conversations with Dr. Ertl about the philosophy that he had within the district of more of the teachers collaborating with one another, the shift from individual classroom focus to department collaborations or grade level collaborations. And we felt it would be best to realign our grant requirements and focus to match up with the district and also support that collaboration as well. So we've done that, and it's been exciting to see what's happened. We still support the grants for the individual teachers, and it may be a kindergarten class that's going to be testing a project on some new books or a different way to handle some classroom textbooks for reading. But we've also funded things like the ropes course at East. And for 2 years, we've provided grants to the journalism class out at Wauwatosa West, and it's been exciting to see the projects that they've done, and fun for us to get emails from them letting us know what types of projects they're doing with their new video equipment, as well as just the whole journalism class as well. We've also granted for new technology, because technology is dramatically different, as we all know, than it was 20 years ago. So smart response technology, as well as technology that can help children learn, especially for those who don't learn as easily in traditional methods. And we've also, this last year, provided some grant money for the World Languages program so that they could have new headsets for their lab. And the reports back is that it's really helping the children learn to listen and to speak the language more directly, because they can work one-on-one and more intensely. But we're also doing things like funding a project, the ukuleles that Roosevelt School has purchased over the last year. And it was really fun to go to their Christmas concert and see the children playing, and every single grade level is using them. So the foundation really wants to, it's positioning itself to grow, working to communicate more out into the community so that we can raise awareness and raise more money for the school. So what we'd like to do going forward is come to the board maybe twice a year, just give you an update, have that communication going back and forth like we're doing with the school district. It's wonderful to work with them. And I also want to thank those of you who have personally supported the foundation as well. So thank you very much, and we'll be back hopefully in fall. You allow us a few moments on the calendar, on the agenda as well. So thank you very much.
Kathy,
Questions?
would you like to comment on the annual meeting, which is
Oh,
coming up?
yes. Thank you.
The
I
date,
was
the time,
so
the
busy talking about
location?
this other stuff. We have, on February 9th, we have our annual meeting coming up, and this year we have an alumni from, I think he's from East.
It's Wauwatosa East.
And Dan Hayes, and he has produced a documentary on the honor flights. And it's gotten quite a bit of recognition. The project has gotten recognition. It's not finished yet. It's just about done. I'm not sure when he's going to be premiering it, but he will be showing some of the footage and talking about his experience, as well as how Wauwatosa helped him to grow into the adult that he is. So that's on February 9th. It's going to be at the Bluemont Country Club starting at 5 o'clock. And then we also are we've started the work on our walk-run, which is the first weekend in May, that first Saturday in May. So we hope you all join us. You should have gotten your invitations already. Good. I'm glad to see some nodding faces. So we hope you join us that evening. Okay, thank you.
We
Any
need to
other questions?
commend you on the work that the EFW is doing, and I'm excited to I think I'm right on this. Jim Funk is now a member of the
Yes, he is.
EFW.
Mhm.
He was one of the ones that planted the seeds for EFW
Yes, he
when he
was.
was on the board, and it's been a wonderful contribution
Yes.
to Wauwatosa. So,
Well, it's great to have people who were involved when it was first started. Tom Kirchen is still someone that I talk to quite often. And it's good to have the new ideas and to see how everyone's coming together, not because it's directly affecting our children at this moment, because my children are gone. They're both independent adults now. So it's not that I'm doing this or Jim is doing this because we have children in the system, but we believe that having a strong public school system is critical for our children and for Wauwatosa. So that's why we're involved.
Kathy, isn't Mr. Hayes the second Hayes that has spoken
Yes.
at EFW? His older brother, Steve, also
Yes.
spoke a
Spoke
number of
about
years ago.
5 or 6 years ago, I think it was. So the Hayes family has got...
Made their mark in
They
Wauwatosa.
certainly have, and beyond Wauwatosa. So, good. Well, thank you very much. Any other questions?
Yes, Mary Jo.
Just a comment, and thank you for being here. I think the visibility is an important piece. We are currently engaging in some school board development, and community engagement is always been an important part, but we're going to be needing to do more, as you said. Things are changing, and so for you to come tonight and be here, I think, is one important step. I just want to say, too, I was visiting Roosevelt and just happened on the class with the ukuleles right before Christmas. It was wonderful.
Wasn't it?
It was so
just-
cute. Yeah, she had a
It-
fourth grade class playing, and then she had first grade audience. And so we stopped in and listened. So
Well, when the children came out to play for the Christmas concert, you could just see how that ukulele just
Yeah.
fits so
Oh, yeah.
right. You know, I think before that we all thought, well, it's a very creative idea.
Yeah.
But there were a number of us at the concerts this year,
Yeah.
and it was exciting to see how much the kids
And-
enjoyed it. And now I understand there's a ukulele group that started at Longfellow as well. The children are moving up, you know, and they're very excited about it. And so it's great to see the seed money then blossoming within the district.
yeah, and then just briefly recognition of Peggy Parr, who is the teacher.
Absolutely.
Um,
Thank you.
So yeah, so that's all. Thanks.
Good. Anyone?
Are there
else?
any other comments?
All right. Thank you.
Is there anyone from the audience that wishes to speak to Ms. Eli and EFW? Thank you, Andrea, for being here also, and we look forward to the next visit.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And if we could get into human resources, please, a policy, I believe Mr. Chanin will be speaking to that.
The board should have in their packet a revision to policy 8462. This is again a statutory update. The main change is that prior to the legislative change, only our professional staff members were mandatory reporters, and so the policy basically had a two-level change. There was the obligations of our professional staff members, and then a board-level directive that anyone else in the district who noticed abuse or neglect were to report it to a principal, who would then make the report. The law has now changed so that school employees in general have an obligation to report abuse and neglect directly and are now mandatory reporters. And so the change is that we're deleting the word professional because all staff members now share this obligation. Along with that, at the bottom of the page, we are adding a training requirement, which is an update to Chapter 118, that we now have an obligation to make sure we provide training to all staff, which is something that we'll be integrating into our annual training and policy distribution requirements. I would note that there is one deletion in the policy, which when I bring back to you, I will correct. The very final deletion in the right-hand column, which indicates that we would not discriminate or dismiss an employee who makes a report in good faith, that will be added back into the policy. That was an inadvertent deletion. And when I present it in its final form, that will be back in there. Questions?
Yes, Mr. Croner?
Just one clarification. It states early on in the policy that employees should immediately call the local office of Child Welfare Department, or the administrator should do so. But then the next to the last paragraph, it talks about principals being mindful of physical or mental abuse being inflicted on a student, and any such instances where the real or alleged should be dealt with in accordance with administrative procedures. Are those also, I assume those administrative procedures are as significant as language above
They've been
requires?
updated as well, and to be in compliance with this, one thing that we added to the administrative procedures, we actually added in the phone numbers for local law enforcement and our Milwaukee County Child Welfare. I think that was a oversight in the administrative procedures, because I think that if someone had something to report, they shouldn't have to go hunting around for that number. So, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Is there anyone in the audience that has a question of Mr. Chanin? Seeing none, thank you very much, and I believe you have a proposed calendar for us to review. You wish to speak to that at this time?
I do. All the board members should have found a memo with an updated proposal. We circulated the proposal that was originally in the board packet, and there was some feedback from teachers, feedback from administrators, and there's always choices that have to be made about when that last day of school is and when the snow day makeup. And I want to go through those changes and also give you an overview of the calendar in general. It maintains that 180 days of student contact time. It comes out to 192 work days. Again, our traditional teacher calendar has been 191. The reason why there's an extra day is because one of the objectives of this calendar was to remove half days. Those half days were in the calendar, they're counted as student contact time, but they're not necessarily our most productive learning time. When you take out those 2 half days, which counted as full days of student contact, and you want to have the same level of professional development, you end up with an extra day in the calendar. So that's the reason why there's 192 days. We maintain the same number of holidays as in the past, along with conference compensation days. We started as our school day as early as possible, which is September 4th, which is statutorily required that we're not starting in August. The changes that you're seeing from the calendar that you initially reviewed was that in January, we wanted to move that staff in-service and work day to the week after exams, but we did want to maintain the Martin Luther King holiday on the 21st of January. This does mean that our last day of school got pushed one day. We also wanted to not have our snow makeup day be at the end of the school year. We wanted to push that back to earlier in the year, and we pushed that back to May 24th, which would create a 4-day weekend if we don't have any snow days. But again, we didn't want to give up that staff development time that had been built in on that date. So as you see, our last day of school, rather than being the 12th of June, is now the 14th of June for students.
Okay.
Okay.
Board members, any questions? Yes, Mary Jo?
The snow day, so we're just scheduling one, is that correct?
That's correct.
Smart, that's a good idea.
We don't have snow days anymore.
I know. I mean, I'm sure that we can do whatever we would need to do if we had an unusual year, but,
Yes.
you know, parents get those calendars and see, you know, at the end of the year, their kids might have to go 3 more days, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, and, you know, there's always questions of how productive those are for anybody. So, that's good. January 21st, though, I'm confused about that. Is that a non-work day, but it's a non-school day?
Correct.
The district is closed, right?
I don't know that the administrative offices are closed, but it is not a workday for teaching staff, and it's not a school day, but it's not a paid holiday. I think one of the misconceptions about paid holidays for staff is that our teachers are paid a salary. So to create a paid holiday simply means you divide their salary by an additional day. You know, obviously, they're paid a weekly salary, so it won't vary that week.
Okay. And then I had a question. This is our first year of developing the calendar without collective bargaining being involved, and I was wondering what was the difference in the process that you used?
Well, obviously, rather than meeting with a bargaining committee and exchanging proposals, we actually presented some calendar ideas of this year's calendar to the district advisory committee. We wanted to get their input on the types of choices that we're making. We didn't have them design this year's calendar. We really wanted more feedback on the process. We then developed a calendar administratively. We shared that with the members of the district advisory committee, and then with, you know, a broader administrative group, the principals, and we got feedback from principals and from members of the district advisory committee.
And is it very different in the way of prep time and any of those other,
It's not the real big.
any of the other things that were always discussed?
The real big change, I think, is that extra day that results from removing the half-days. There's really no way to maintain the same amount of staff development and also remove half-days of instruction. So that results in an extra day. You'll notice that we also don't have 2 days at the beginning of the school year, as we have in the past, but that's a decision administratively to combine the building day and the district-wide opening day into one day, and to reduce that amount of kind of meetings that we hold. But obviously, there is still an obligation for teachers to have their classroom set up by the 4th, and just like in the past, teachers often were in August, setting up classrooms and doing that type of work.
And the revisions that we got tonight, those haven't been shared yet with,
No, I mean, that they were a result of the feedback.
Right,
But I guess this
right.
would be the first time they've been shared publicly.
okay. And then my final question is along the same lines. This is a proposed calendar, meaning
Meaning
it has to
would-
be board approved, or it will go back to the group?
It would be in your discretion. I think traditionally, this was an item that was contained in a collective bargaining agreement, and the board ratified it as part of a package. Although I think when we look back at our collective bargaining, it has been one of those items where we may very well settle on a collective bargaining agreement and then delegate to the committee to decide.
Okay.
But because this is something that's traditionally approved by the board through collective bargaining, will be before you for approval.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, thank you. Everything is different now, so I want to make sure I know how we're operating, so, thank you.
Just one of, excuse me, one of the other concerns, which was the last workday on June 17th, and when we start summer school, we have to set up the start of summer school, because obviously a number of our teachers are teaching summer school. Traditionally, it's been the week after school is out, but I know in the past where we've had snow days, bump that back, and there was a teacher workday on the Monday following. We were very flexible in looking at it and saying, you've got responsibilities, get them done. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to be on Monday. We open the schools on the weekend, people can come in, and ultimately, a lot of the work they have to do can be done electronically with grades and things like that. So that is something we'll continue to be flexible on at the end of next year as well.
Yes, Sharon?
What will be happening to professional learning time? Will that still be Wednesday early release?
Yes.
And so what I see is the major change here is moving from the half days to the full days, correct? In services?
Yeah, for the 2 days, I believe.
Right, traditionally, I think there's a half day in October and a half day in February that were being eliminated with a full day of school instead.
I could see that having the last day of school on the 14th, but does that provide it's a snow day?
No, if there is.
That is the last day.
That is, if there is a snow day, we would be in school on the 24th of May
Okay,
instead. That would become a
Okay.
3-day instead of a 4-day weekend.
okay, I just wanted to clarify that. And one thing, you did bring up summer school, so that would have been a concern, but I know this isn't really related to this particular calendar, but one thing that I think would be helpful is if on the district calendar, we put the summer school start and the summer school end so that parents can plan ahead.
That can be done.
Thanks.
Okay. Sharon? Is that?
Yes,
your-
thank you.
okay. Anyone else? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address a question concerning the calendar? Seeing none? Student learning? Mrs. Ehrenberger, I believe. And Mr. Anderson.
Good evening. I'm here with Beth Ehrenberger, Director of Student Learning, and Andrea Powers, who is the Content Team Leader of Health. And we're going to give you an update on the work that has been done on our Human Growth and Development Committee in terms of recommendations that we move forward in the work done in our content team in the health area. So, just starting out, we put the advisory committee together based upon 9140 policy and also 118.09, the Wisconsin State Statute. Basically states that every 3 years we need to have an advisory committee looking over our health, human growth and development curriculum. By the way, that curriculum used to be called our Life Ed curriculum. We're now calling that Human Growth and Development. The purpose of our advisory committee is really to review that health, human growth and development curriculum, make some recommendations, and also be guided by our policy 2414, which really dictates and has some language about human growth and development in terms of how we program students. These are a number of committee members. All committee members did not participate in every single meeting. We'll go over that meeting schedule with you. We met for 4 times from about 5:30 to 7:30 here in the boardroom. And in those 4 meetings, we had a format where the public had any public interest that we needed to address in the first 10 minutes. And then our large group would do some work, and then we'd break up into small work teams. And I'll talk about the 4 areas where we were making some recommendations. And the last piece was that at the end of the night, we'd all get together to craft the communication as we move forward. So the charge of our committee was to create district belief statements around human growth and development. We looked at revising our communication process with parent letters and communication, looking at rubrics to evaluate any media materials, and identifying curriculum gaps area for improvement. All this, again, presenting, moving forward to our health curriculum team that will do the actual work on the curriculum. So here are our district belief statements. We want to promote a healthy lifestyle, including respect for self and others, and encourage students to make healthy decisions. The group wants to, in terms of our health and human growth and development curriculum, promote and encourage open and respectful communication between students and their parents, guardians, and other trusted responsible adults. Our program will provide current medically accurate, developmentally appropriate, and comprehensive information about human growth and development and sexuality. We'll provide a safe and respectful forum to address issues, questions, concerns about personal sexual development and feelings. Develop an understanding that sexuality is an integral component of one's physical, social, and emotional development, and to promote the development of positive personal standards of behavior. So these are belief statements that help to shape our program. So first, we're going to look at the group that worked on revising parent communication letters. Recommendation number 1 was to standardize our parent letters, be specific about dates of instruction, topics to be covered, opportunities for when review of material would take place, any specifics about the instruction, whether we'd be separating males, females, and any other pertinent information and materials. So that was clearly outlined as part of one of our communications. The second piece that this group recommended was to create a website for our human growth development resources, one that could provide access and support to learning for parents. So this area is something that we want to do some work to, again, provide additional resources for our parents in our community. In terms of the evaluation of materials and rubric subgroup, recommendations, number 1 was to need to meet the PK Wisconsin health standards, Wisconsin Act 134, Act 113, Wisconsin State Statutes 11809, then the Wauwatosa School Board Policy. Those are critical documents that shall be used by our health content team in evaluating materials. Also, looking at the 4th edition 2005 of the Human Growth Development Packet published by Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. And third recommendation was to use developmentally appropriate, literacy appropriate to our population student level. And that rubric is in the Human Growth Development Packet 16.15 within the DPI packet. 4th recommendation was, in terms of evaluating website content, was to also use a reference rubric in that packet, rubric 16.17. And the 5th recommendation, again, another rubric within that packet for evaluating DVDs, YouTube, any media of that nature. Final recommendation from the group was, again, using the pamphlet relevant materials and any textbooks to, again, use the reference document in 16.14 of the Human Growth Development Packet. So these rubrics were all developed prior through DPI. In terms of identifying curriculum area gaps, I'll let Ms. Powers talk a little bit more about some of the work in this area, in these areas.
Yes, we looked at the curriculum that's already in place as part of the life education. We looked at a couple recommendations. One was to clearly define what the human growth and development curriculum would look like and the responsibility for who would be teaching that at the different grade levels, so that there is the accountability piece that this material will be covered. The second was to use language during the work that's important, that's listed in here. And also making sure that we have staff development available for teaching human growth and development, and to have that continuous training to keep teachers informed of best practices and new information. A couple things that came up for elementary was we looked at a few different things. One was to note any gaps that might have occurred. We saw that there was some material covered, say in first grade, but then didn't necessarily come up again until later in maybe fourth or fifth grade. So we looked at some ways to bring more continuity from grade level to grade level, so there's a little more progression. We also looked at what was recommended, that we be proactive and teach information before the kids would need it, so making sure we're not giving them information maybe after it might be useful to them. So some of the recommendations that we have listed, again, we put down any of the topics that are already a part of the curriculum, as is noted with the plus sign, and then in the X shows anything that we would suggest be added to that grade level or to multiple grade levels. And as you can see, some of them may be covered in every grade level, some maybe kindergarten and first and second grade, or some that were fourth and fifth grade. But again, trying to repeat some of the topics we felt were the most important. And the secondary team used a similar format. They looked at fifth grade through 10th grade health, and similar looked at topics that are covered already and made some suggestions for where there should be some additions made. And again, it's to provide the continuity as kids progress through the grade levels.
To note, we've used two consultants during this process. John Hiskin, who is the DPI consultant for health and human growth development through DPI. Also, Dr. Sabina Dair from Milwaukee Medical College. She is a parent within our district, and she's provided some basic background on medically appropriate education and developmentally appropriate learning for students. The slides that we presented for both middle and high school in terms of some of the curriculum recommendations are just a snapshot on the overhead. The complete recommendations are in that board packet that you received. So all this information now will be used in conjunction with the health content team as they work through moving forward and writing the actual curriculum, looking at materials. One of the things that we're going to continue to do is have a subgroup of our overall committee to continue to work with and get feedback from the health content team as they work on human growth and development. One thing I want to point out, if you look in your board packet, we put together a matrix to help delineate the curriculum and the instruction at both all in our health areas. So you'll notice that across that matrix, there are a number of different areas within our health curriculum where we actually instruct students. We want to make sure that we highlight the human growth and development, not only the curriculum itself by grade level, but the instruction where it takes place, by whom it's delineated and delivered. So part of the work that the content team is going to do is to create this scope and sequence matrix so that parents and all employees and professionals know where and all employees when we're supposed to be teaching it. We will have an opt-out, and part of that opt-out is we want our students just to opt out of the human growth and development slice of the overall health curriculum. So again, this piece becomes very important for us to clearly delineate that. Questions?
Yes, Mrs. Mufeld?
Thank you. I think this is a very important initiative in our district. You were mentioning when this work is going to be done. How quickly will it be done? Will it be ready by the fall?
Well, we have a meeting set up tomorrow to meet with Andrea and begin talking about the health content team and how we're going to begin to work through this process. As you know, we do have a science review going on at the same time. Certainly, the recommendation from the committee itself wanted to emphasize the importance of addressing human growth and development and getting to that work sooner than later, as it is really important for us, and it hasn't been looked at in a long time. So to put a timeline on it would be hard, but we're going to start looking at that right away. And certainly, we'd like to begin to maybe target areas that we could look at sooner this year if we can.
And we're going to be putting together an implementation, plan that would get us to the end of this year so we could implement for next year. They've been working on the health part of this now for over a year
Right.
in a content team. So I think they're ready to pull the work together. So we're anticipated that that timeline would get us ready to go by next year.
I mean, it does sound like it from the content and the detail that we've received. One other question that I had was the opt-out. Do many parents and or students opt out?
No.
Okay.
You don't.
And at the high schools, and this is done as well at elementary, the elementary levels, the high school teachers do hold a meeting for parents with all the materials. Parents can come take a look and really see what the program is about, and it is something that isn't necessarily as well attended as we might typically like it to be, but we do try to get that information out to parents so that they are fully aware of what is taught, and then they have that option to opt out if they choose.
Yes, because I can see situations where some may be uncomfortable with some of the subjects, and just so that they have a way that they can specifically target that so that their student can take advantage of the other parts of the curriculum. Thank you.
Further questions? Mrs. Fee?
Thank you. I think my questions are actually more properly directed to Dr. Ertl. First off, who's adopting these district belief statements? Is this something that's going to come before the board for adoption? Or will this simply be a district belief statement adopted by a committee?
I think it came as a result of the committee to help guide the work in this area for the health implementation team or the health development team. So it's from the Citizens Advisory Committee that helps to guide the work for the health team.
But if they're labeled district belief statements, are they actually being adopted by anyone?
I don't know that there's going to be a board vote on the district.
Well, that leads to
No.
my next question, which is, what, if any, role does the board have in this whole process?
Well, this is an advisory committee that the recommendations are to come to the Board of Education. So that we need to bring them to you. And the recommendations in the committee work, I believe the board does have a role in whether or not you accept that these recommendations brought to you by the advisory committee are something that will guide our curriculum.
And lastly, you mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Anderson, that there was a time at each of your committee meetings for public forum, so to speak. Were there members of the public who came and spoke?
What we did is we asked for, if there were public forums, that they need to make an appointment through the curriculum office so that we can get them on the docket to address that. We did not have any public forum people that wanted to come in and set those times up. So
there were no public comment at the meetings.
no one came in to want to speak to the entire group on any specific subject.
Okay, thank you.
But they were given the opportunity
Yes,
to do that.
yes. The other thing I want to mention is that the 2210 procedures and curriculum also apply as the content team is writing that curriculum. They'll be coming back and forth to the curriculum council also. So any recommendations for the curriculum do have to come back to the board for approval. So.
Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Randall?
I just wanted to respond to Mrs. Fee as well. The board's role is Also, in our policy, which almost word for word reflects the state statute, our policy 2414. So that is, again, what these recommendations were built around. So not a lot of choice. Again, the statutes are very particular. Our board policy follows that, and these recommendations then were built around that. So it is definitely inclusive of board input.
Mr. Croner?
I also had a question about the belief statements, but only because the ones that we have in our packet are different than the ones you showed us tonight. So which is the final, the one on the slide, the final version?
I apologize if they're different.
And some of the themes are the same, but they're worded differently.
I do apologize. They should be the slides that were presented through the PowerPoint. That's the actual correct statements
So
that
the
will
ones-
guide the,
The ones in the text are out of date then?
yes.
One question I had is we revised the human growth development policy last spring to include instruction on gender identity, specifically in making sure students understand gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, and questioning people so that they, one, could understand their own development, and two, understand other people to reduce bullying. But I didn't identify that in any of the paperwork that we had. So my question is, was that talked about, and am I just missing where it would be discussed in the curriculum?
No, that was discussed within our committees in their work. As we developed our district belief statements, that was also a piece that we discussed. So we made sure to look at the language outlined by 2414, that was a document that we're going to be use during the process as we look at the curriculum also. So that was important in terms of the actual language within that piece.
So when I look at, like this table you gave us for like the secondary 6 through 8 and the high school under human growth and development, I really don't see anything to me that identifies that as a topic. Is that?
Yeah, that's actually just a draft example. So that's not a completed matrix yet. That work's going to be done as we move forward. So what you have in the board pack is an example of how we want to clearly delineate between human growth and development and all our other health areas.
And then some of this work that has been done even through the health committee, and we did do some work with this last spring with both the adolescent studies teachers in 6th grade, family and consumer education teachers at the high school, and health teachers. So we have not finished that work, but we have involved them. Our teachers are very receptive to how they might approach that and are looking for materials and things to be able to include. So I was looking here too. I don't see it, but I do know that it's part of what we expect to have in our health review, and it'll be included with human growth and development as a topic.
Okay. I know you consider priority as well. I just didn't see it, and I want to make
Yep.
sure it didn't get lost in the shuffle.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Further comments or questions? Is there anyone from the audience that wishes to come forth and speak on this subject? Seeing none? Thank you very much. And you will be coming before us again as you proceed, right? As the things become close to finalization. Thank you. Mr. Anderson, are you going to stay right there?
I certainly am.
Okay, thank you. And you're going to give us a report on the trade school.
Yes. Good evening, again. We're here to talk about our Tulsa School of Trade, really an operational review. I have sitting next to me John Finch, Governance Board President, And so we're here to talk to you a little bit about some changes that are coming our way in terms of the Toast School of Trades. Current year, we were expecting in our charter approximately 60 students maximum at this point for our third year of implementation. Currently, we have 14 students enrolled, 6 seniors, 8 juniors. We saw a decline in enrollment this year. We are not meeting our current goals as outlined by the current charter agreement. So we know that we've had a number of obstacles from last year's recruitment, feedback from students, parents, our governance board and counselors, that students were very reluctant to leave their home schools and come to the trade school after attending their home school for 2 years. The other piece that we're working with is, again, space, define space here at the Fisher Building with renovations. So those things together led us to some of our current work over the last 2 months. John Finch and myself have toured both East and West High School facilities. We've looked with those facilities at both East and West with principals. Bruce Johnson has been sharing the pros and cons. He actually looked over both sites, reflected and gave us some information about those facilities. The current building tech ed programs in terms of their operation were looked at. Knowing that we want to take our school to one of the buildings to make it an integral part of the community, we wanted to look at where was the least disruptive environment for us to transfer to. So we didn't want to disrupt current tech ed programming if all possible. The government board, with all that feedback, the help of John and myself, voted to have a half-day program to modify what we currently do and have that located over at East High School. The half-day would focus on taking what we currently do and boiling it down to just the trade piece. We know that that's a critical area that we have to get right. So I think from the board perspective and the governance board perspective and from an administration, we know this is a critical career pathway for our students. But instead of trying to create a new wheel, we're saying let's bring it back to what our core value is for the trade school. And that's to provide students with a pathway and instruction in carpentry, plumbing, and electrical. So in our discussions, that's kind of where we want to take the school. We want to shrink it down, rebuild it, and really get to our core values and really get it right. We know there's going to be a reduction in staff. This certainly is going to be need determined based upon student enrollment for next year. Currently, we'll have to look at our charter agreement. Currently, we feel that this charter agreement formally acknowledges the partnership between the trades and the school district. So one of the things that we're going to have to do, and we talked about it, is our enrollment period for the trade school as set forth by the charter the first 3 weeks of February. So February 6th through the 24th, we'll be actively pursuing students who would be interested in a half-day program located at East High School. We've put together some guidelines because I think one of the things that we have found is that we haven't clearly communicated what we're after in the trades in terms of student as they're coming in. The trade student needs to be college ready. They need to be on track for graduation. So as a junior, we're looking for someone who has credits of 12 to 13 credits, successful completion of algebra or concurrently enrolled in geometry, successful completion of introduction to engineering, and then 9th grade reading level. So again, looking at discipline and attendance and good standings. Again, these recommendations to help really frame for teachers, for guidance counselors, for parents to understand that students that are going into the trades pathway are just as capable and just as necessary in terms of getting a college-ready education in Wauwatosa as somebody that's going college bound. We know currently that about 40% of our students estimated drop out of college. There's an average of about $24,000 that college students accrue in debt. If we looked at East High School, 9% of our graduates pursue post-secondary, and 16% pursue two-year institutions. And at West High School, 80% of our student graduates pursue post-secondary, and 70% of our students pursue a four-year, and within that, also 20% a two-year institution. So we know we have to engage our students within the pathway. We have the capability of doing that, but in the current program, the way we have the charter set up, it's detached from the confines of a culture within a school. So in terms of what it looks like next year, again, we're looking at downsizing in terms of going after a population of students that truly will be engaged, but will be engaged for a half day, and then will receive their instruction outside that time period in regular classes and instruction through Wauwatosa School District. But we feel that we have to get this equation right. And to do that, we need to shrink down and get back to what I said is our basics. So really helping our students learn plumbing, electrical, and carpentry through trades instructor in collaboration with teachers here in the district, so that we can provide that pathway. And once we begin to develop that pathway and we get successful at it, we can look at other options down the road. But right now, we know that this is a critical piece of what we need to do. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of recruitment. John certainly is willing, with other board members, to make this work and make this a viable pathway for our students. I think the charter school experience is an interesting experience. Not every experiment works, so rather than the trades we're in, and we want to make this right for our kids as a pathway to success. Questions?
Where at East High School is this going to be located?
Currently, the tech ed room at East High School, which is located back by the building ground area, is currently not used. It's used very sparingly for different classes here and there, but not tech ed classes. That's not scheduled on a regular basis for actually classes. So we've used that in the morning, still give access to the rest of the school in the afternoon to those facilities if they need be.
Questions? Mr. Croner?
Oh, thank you. I didn't understand the logic between moving the half-day of the tech ed part to East High School if that setup and equipment is already here. Why not do that half-day here and then have the kids move to the high school for the other classes, the second half of the day?
Again, one thing that we found from feedback was that students are very reluctant to leave their home school to come to the trade school, even though we provide a pathway for them. So if we can embed within the culture of the school the access to that pathway, we feel that that could be a winning success for our students. Again, students after 2 years are feeling very attached to their school. And so part of it is we feel that that's a good fit for moving forward, trying to build that program.
And you'll be able to replicate the building spaces and things that you have here at the high schools?
It's actually better. So East High School has a higher ceiling, more room for that space on the residential build, plus down the stairs and actually part of the mechanical room, we could actually replicate some commercial and industrial, plumbing, electrical. So the experience for the students will be actually much more realistic, I think more impactful, and will also allow us for expansion. And current space downstairs in this building, we're already full.
Okay, and what about the trades? Are they on board with this? Is it a reduction in time for training for them, or how is that going to work?
Not as we see it. In terms of our commitment, we're seeing a reduction in FTE. Again, that's going to depend on the student body that we recruit in February. So right now, I could predict maybe 0.6, 0.8 FTE to allocate for the trade school at this time. Over time, we hope to grow that, but again, we're trying to bring it back to the basics to deliver the instruction in plumbing, electrical, and carpentry, do that very well, and do that so good that we can build off that program. I think we tried to do a lot of things, and that became difficult. So we think it's better to regroup, focus on what's important, what we're after, and then build from there.
So when you say staff reduction, you're talking about district employees. And
Yeah.
is it 2 FTE now?
Yes, right
or-
now we have 2 FTE.
And so you're just mainly reducing it to 1, potentially?
1 to part-time possibly, yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned in your slides the estimated college dropout rate of 40%. Is that just a general statistic, or is that Wauwatosa students?
No, that's a general statistic. That's not Wauwatosa. I should have highlighted
I
that.
was gonna say.
Certainly, I'd like to say we do better, but that statistic I do not have. But yeah, on average, it's somewhere around 38, 39, some say 45, and depends for different minority groups and socioeconomic, so.
I wanted to point that out because I think we do much better than that. I think that's something
Yes.
I don't know if we track that. Hopefully we do it at some point, but I wanted to point that out. And I was a little concerned about, well, I don't know if I should be concerned about it, but the goal of raising the standards, I guess, of the students that are entering the program. It seems to me you're sort of changing the emphasis from what the students that this program was targeted for. Is everyone on board with that? I mean, it seems like you might be leaving out students that are currently in the program that
No, I think
benefit from it the most.
we're not leaving those students out. What we have to do is the trades are really clear on, the students they need are the same students that are going to college. All kids college ready. What we have to do is, if there are students who are not quite ready for that type of program at the end of their sophomore year, what we have to do is provide how we're going to get students to be ready to enter a program like the trades. And so what we're not doing is saying you can't be part of it. We just as a system have to say we have to involve and get kids up to speed for reading, for math, so that they can be successful through the trades. We found out we've had some very low math students and low reading students, and it's just very difficult for us to navigate those pieces and actually intervene and do a really good job with those students to help them get back to where they need to be. If you look at the OSHA manual, you open that OSHA manual up, high-level reading. So, yeah, students that go into the trade, we do need a high level of competency. And again, they're recommendations. We certainly don't want to exclude students, but we certainly want to set the bar and kind of talk about it as that the trades really need students just like any other class. So we're gonna have to figure out how to scaffold for students who aren't quite there to get them there so that we can get them through that program. Because what we're finding is students who are coming in that are lacking those pieces, we don't have the pieces of scaffold for them, so they're failing and we're failing them. So that's why we're kind of trying to go back to the basics for those trade pieces right now and really develop it well, and begin looking at what are those support mechanisms that if a student is, in freshman year and they were really looking at maybe going into the trades and they're reading at a 6th grade level, how are we going to scaffold their learning freshman and sophomore year to get them ready to enter the trades?
And just because I forgot to look this up today, and I apologize, but with the current contract, is that a 3-year contract, or was that a 5-year contract with 2 years
Yeah,
left?
it goes through 2014, I believe.
Okay, so I assume you'll address contract modifications if we need it?
Yes.
Before we move forward? Okay.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about, would it be a better program? Would it be a charter? And again, I tried to address that saying a charter helps to formally recognize the partnership between the trades and the school district, and the board and the administration feel that is important.
And one last question. I don't know if you've estimated this yet. Do you know how much it will cost to move the program to East and retrofit the school for what it needs for the
The
program?
actual moving cost and actual doing some retrofitting, talking with Bruce Johnson, he has budgeted some money. I can't give you an exact dollar figure, I certainly can get that. But it's more manpower, moving things, storage areas that they have over already at East. will accommodate what our needs are. So it's going to take a little bit of transition for us to figure out, so it's not going to be a huge renovation expense. It's going to be more working with buildings, grounds to figure out the fit and storage and things of that nature.
All right, thank you.
Mrs. Randall?
Thanks very much. Mr. Finch, what is your background? How did you get involved in the charter school?
I've worked from Wauwatosa for like 12 years,
Okay.
and I worked with Joe Weisling on some
Okay.
carpentry training programs
Great.
that we actually trade, essentially training services for my sales staff, then into the carpenters that come and use our facility.
Okay.
So I worked with Joe for 2 years, and then actually got involved with Joe in this program here. I've done some training with the Tosa School of the Trades graduates, so I worked with our instructors Neil and Jill, and we've done some training at the Milwaukee Tool facility, and I've been here a few times.
Thank you very much. You looked familiar. I'm sure I probably have seen you in the charter school. But regarding FTEs, now my understanding is that our two outstanding educators, Mrs. Kobernik and Mr. Story, were delivering core curriculum. Is that correct?
Yes. So we've already had conversations with building principals in terms of how they might be brought back into the schools. Again, depending on our student role, we might need one of the teachers. So we're already exploring and having those conversations.
You might need one of the teachers in the charter school
Yes.
for.
One of the things that we need to have, we can't just have, we can't have no instructor licensed teacher in the classroom. So that's why it has to be a partnership between the instructor and also our trades instructor. So one of the things we've talked about a lot is really developing the teacher instructor relationship. That they should be developing their lessons collaboratively, their assessments, how they're tracking their assessments and progress with students. So those are the pieces that we're really going to focus on next year in terms of we have an outline of the curriculum, we have that, but the actual implemented curriculum as opposed to the intended curriculum, there's a gap and we need to close that gap.
Okay, so you will be able to build on the work that
Yes.
our staff members have done with the tradespeople already,
Yes.
because I know that partnership work has already started, so hopefully that'll continue. The other thing is, if we know that it's a problem for kids to leave their home school, and we just implement this at East, what does that say to West?
Well, we
And I
talked
know-
about that piece, and the hope is that vision down the road, when we become successful, maybe we can look at expanding this to another high school. One of the things we've talked about is if we're putting this work in, and we know it's a needed pathway to success to the trades for not only our students, but any students in southeastern Wisconsin and the United States, that if we can create a program so it could be replicated, it could be replicated in any southeastern Wisconsin high school. So that's kind of our aim. We had to pick East or West because we wanted to, again, bring the program down so it could be manageable, that we could focus on that important piece of the trades and really do it well, and then grow from there. And it just so happens that East was the better candidate for less disruption, space availability, those things.
And is there a way that you can encourage West students
Oh,
and
yes, we'll be-
somehow, make
We'll be
this more
over at
palatable?
West, and our hope is that we have West students at East for that first part of the day. And certainly then they'll have to go back to their home school in the afternoon, but that is our hope. So we'll be actually going over to West to have those conversations and look for students at West also. Certainly we want West and East students in this program. We're not exclusive, just because it's going to be at East doesn't mean it's exclusively for East students. So it's for both East and West students.
Right.
Initially.
Right, but it doesn't overcome that barrier that the kids themselves have about leaving their home school. So,
Yeah, it was.
I think that's fair. I think the other thing is they've not only left their home school, but they've left to come to a building where there are no other students that
True.
they work with. So
You're
the
right.
community is gone, the lunchroom's gone.
Yeah.
They don't see anyone else that they wouldn't know
Right.
potentially in the hallways. And I think that will be mitigated by having a wonderful
Yeah.
environment like East
Yeah.
has. I I think that we'll be able to overcome that.
Okay, and it's a really good opportunity. I know there are clubs and groups that combine among Easton, or between East and West, so perhaps this can be the beginning of another opportunity. So, thank you very much for all of the work you've been doing on this. I've been supportive from the beginning, and I know it's kind of difficult when things don't go the way you had hoped, but we had a lot of discussion when we started this, that, the structure of doing it under a charter allows us to, make mistakes, maybe not mistakes, but find out what works, find out what doesn't, and to recognize that and then formulate a response to that is very commendable. And I know it takes a lot of work and a lot of communication. So, thank you.
Mrs. Wright, excuse me, you mentioned the teachers, and I think I just want to point out that we have the two teachers, basically, when we started this program, took a risk, jumped completely out of their comfort zone, came over here to a school, again, for teachers. There's not a lot of collaboration opportunities for the teachers, and I think when they took that risk, I think that says a lot about them, and they've done a lot of different things and attempts to work with the students that are here and to make it successful, and I just wanted to thank them for everything they've done to step out. So,
absolutely.
Mr. Finch, I'm real pleased that you talked just a little bit more about the lunch. I don't know if we realize that, I think at the secondary level, particularly high school, that social time, that time with their friends across the lunch table is extremely important. And I think that is going to be a very important factor. So I appreciate the...
That's how we're going to recruit. The schools will be so fantastic. They're going to need to tell the story at the lunch table, and we'll get more students.
And they could take part in the music program.
Absolutely.
That is made much easier for them. So just keep us informed again how we proceed. And exactly again, what is your title?
I'm the Director of Training for Milwaukee Electric Tool.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Giroux or Mrs. Fee, any questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now ask Mrs. Muehlfeld if you will review the Wisconsin School Board Convention that was held last week, late in the week.
Yes, thank you. The delegate assembly was held last Wednesday afternoon, the 18th. I have a recap that I printed off of the website. I do have a few extra copies for the audience as well. I have one, thank you. Yes, he has one, okay. They didn't release the final adjusted, those amended resolutions yet, but at least this gives you some background on the discussion held at the delegate assembly. It did largely go as we had thought it would. There was a very interesting set of motions that happen at the delegate assembly, and I have attended several times in the past. But actually what ended up happening was the assembly needed to reconsider an amendment, which had not, an amendment to one of the resolutions, which has not ever happened, to my knowledge, in the course of the delegate assembly, and go back to and make their way back to the original resolution. So that was something unprecedented, and I thought was very interesting. Mostly, I guess I should start by saying there were 321 delegates out of the 425 school districts plus the CISAs that can bring delegates to the delegate assembly. So there was pretty good representation there. Again, probably the most activity happened on resolution 12.6, which was the revenue limit calculation timeline. That one school district wanted to amend, and then it was reconsidered. It did then go back to the original motion, which then passed. So it's always very interesting when so many people speak on one resolution. The dynamics are can be, again, quite interesting. There was also another resolution that had considerable activity, which also passed, and that was Resolution 12.7, opposing private school aid. Basically, there was an amendment, Amendment H, to that long and lengthy resolution that stated if the voucher program continues, it must be requested that a student must have attended, it must be required that a student must have attended a public school to be eligible to receive a voucher. And an additional amendment was made for a minimum of 1 year. And it was a very interesting discussion on that amendment. There were districts opposed to it. There were districts in favor of it. But again, I think the Assembly overwhelmingly passed that 261 to 47 with the amendment, largely because public school districts want to oppose private school aid. So that one was the most interesting addition as far as an amendment goes. So again, I'm sorry they didn't have a typed out sheet yet for you to review, but that should be coming within the next few days, and I can make sure that's forwarded to the board members.
And that will include the numbers on the resolution.
Yes, it will
Good.
basically be the same handout, a similar handout that we reviewed at our last meeting, but it would contain anything amended. There might have been one or two other wording amendments to some of the resolutions, but there was not much discussion. I think one other discussion at the pre-delegate assembly was on sparsity aid. That was resolution 12.02. There was also some discussion at the delegate assembly floor. That was also something that districts were very interested in. But largely, most of the resolutions passed by a large margin. And looking back at my notes here to see what was very close, educator effectiveness was very close, actually. And that was 183 to 108. So it's always very interesting to see which resolutions come very close. And I'm looking back at my notes here, and I don't see any that are as close as that one. Any other questions or curious about any?
Mrs. Randall?
So what weight do these carry, and what do we need to do as a district, if anything, in support of the resolutions that have been approved? And one of the reasons I'm asking is we had joined in signing a letter a while back regarding the private school funding, that they were going to fix the original legislation. And apparently that is not moving through the legislature as people had hoped. So, again, will this put some pressure on legislators, or what happens?
What these resolutions do is they're entered into this book, the resolutions adopted by the delegate assemblies, and this is what the WASB uses as their guideline when the legislative session happens. It doesn't always correspond with a particular delegate assembly, for example. Some of these resolutions that were discussed last week may not come up,
Right.
In the session. But what it does is give the WASB legislators the pulse of what the school boards in Wisconsin, and this is a direct link with the school boards in Wisconsin, to go and legislate on their behalf. Individual school districts should definitely stay abreast of what is happening and advocate for their own positions. Again, this is just a guideline, if you will. But of course, there are winners and losers on the side of any one of these resolutions, and that's the fact. And if we want to advocate for a position, we have to be meeting with our legislators, going to the hearings, and advocating, getting our citizens involved, really educating them on what is the impact. And a lot of other school districts are in the same situation. We might be in Wauwatosa, or they may not. So having those relationships and advocating on our own is important too.
Thanks. Exactly what I wanted.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Sharon, for taking time to represent Wauwatosa at the convention. Did you go to the exhibits?
I did not get a chance to
Okay.
go to the
Some free
exhibits.
pencils?
Well, because the delegate assembly went long. It didn't conclude until 4:30 and it started at 1:30, so it was actually a very lengthy assembly this time.
Was there some reason, they've always held it in the morning, was there some reason that they changed to afternoon of this assembly?
I don't know why they changed it. I know that they had it in past years in the morning. I did hear that on the 18th there was and I don't know if anyone from the district was able to go, but there was a general session speaker. That was very good.
What was the topic?
I didn't get to
Oh,
attend
okay,
it.
there was
but-
nothing, okay.
No, but I did hear people, saying it was a good session, and I would be interested to hear if someone from our district went.
Okay, thank you. Anyone in the audience have a question of Mrs. Mufeld? Seeing none, Dr. Earl?
Just a comment, I think the best session of the whole convention was where Mr. Mack was a panelist, talking about open enrollment, which I actually did stop in to see, so.
Do you wish to make any comment, Mr. Mack?
He made plenty during that.
Thank you.
This past week, I had contacted Mrs. Weber about a number of things and asking her ultimately to reinstate the Personnel Committee, and for several different reasons, and I put together some recommendations for the role of the Personnel Committee, and I think we've certainly moved into a different time with negotiations or not having negotiations and decisions being made related to pay, benefits, salary structure, and I think there's a gap, and as we looked at it administratively, we think that having a Personnel Committee can help fill that void of looking at in-depth at research of different things we're working on and can report back to the full board. One of the intentions that I would have is that we would start this process out with the full board executive session after our next meeting to be able to discuss what we can related to negotiations for the upcoming session. We do need to get that ball rolling, even though we don't know what base wages necessarily means. But I think we need to have some discussions and get that piece going. The Personnel Committee would be also, as I have it here, would be the group that would sit during negotiations, and again, not knowing what that could be a 15-minute meeting. I'm not sure what we can all negotiate, but I don't think it's certainly not as extensive as it used to be. But really looking at recommendations regarding staffing from administration, to look at not just teachers, but all of our professional groups, and we still do have requirements to bargain. We're still under contract with some of our groups. The handbook is another piece that we've had plenty of discussions about, and I think can't be a static type thing. We need to do the continual review, and again, out of the direction of the full board, I think that's where the Personnel Committee can help with administration and developing and reviewing and researching. on different conditions that relate to the handbook and working conditions for our teachers and our staff members. But I think ultimately the reason that I come to this point in saying this would be helpful for the administration to be able to work with the board and work through a lot of these different issues in a timely manner. And when I say timely, we're not real sure what that means either. We don't know how quickly we have to go. We know we need to determine how we're going to pay the teachers for next year. We know we need to get a salary structure in place for the future. And again, we don't want to go too fast, and we don't want to make those kind of mistakes that you never can recover from, or it takes a long time to recover and gets us out of competition. But I think this is a way that can help us, and I reflect back upon our time when we had the Personnel Committee operating. I know it was one committee that was effective, at least I felt it was effective working with administration and with the full board.
Sharon?
So question for you, Dr. Ertl. It looks like the Personnel Committee's goals or objectives are expanded from the last time we convened a committee of this nature.
I think the role is a little bit different because there's more to it now. I think, in particular, I think that was set up to look at administrator benefits, and I think it was about 1.5 years that that committee operated looking at that major component, but this is kind of expanding that's also part of the discussion as well, and bringing recommendations for changes to policies as well related to benefits and pay.
I'm wondering what the thoughts are. There's a last bullet point here on any other matter concerning personnel referred to the committee. What type of matters would those be? Would those be complaints or?
No, I think it would.
Relate to?
I think it would relate to any policy that impacts staff, that the full board has concern or questions or a need for further clarification, that they want the committee, that they can charge the full committee or the committee with researching. I mean, an example might be sick days, although that's part of our policy, but the board may want, full board may want some research and some review on sick days, and the administration would bring that to the committee to look through and study and bring to the full board. So that might be one example. Or leaves, whether it's sick or other kinds.
Well, and I can see the value in this, but I'm hesitant because I really think that to be an effective and functioning committee, that there really has to be a commitment by the administration to really present all of the issues and the documentation and anything related to the subject matter, data, whatever it is. And also then that the full board would have the opportunity to review such material if it pertained, to a board vote or a policy decision or whatever it is. And then also a commitment by the committee personnel to make sure that they are holding administration accountable to give them that information that they need to have these discussions, to bring it back to the board for discussions, because I'm worried about that.
I think that's listed under bullet number, the last, towards the bottom of the sheet. To keep the board informed, to meet with the total board in an exec session. I'm just picking out separate words, but I think that's already in place. And I think this board has been very careful about that we do include the complete board in decision-making. And I think whenever if there's something that we feel we don't have enough information, we've asked for it further, and it's there immediately. So I don't think we have to worry about that. We can be reminded, but I do think this district has operated very carefully on that in allowing all board members to be fully informed. And each board member has a responsibility. If there's something missing, like you're presenting, then we bring that to the full board or to the superintendent. Yes, Mary Jo?
I think, Sharon, you just described what a committee should do and how it should operate. And I know you expressed it as a concern. Historically, we have not been real successful in committee. What I see in the need for this committee is the volume of things that we now have to know about and keep up to date on that we didn't have to before. Because those things were all addressed in a bargaining contract. Also, the many changes that are coming legislatively. And so I see it as, yeah, I think the people who are involved do need to be committed, and they do need to know that there's going to have to be some time involved in this, because if we start at the full board level, I mean, this could take up every meeting forever. And it goes back to what I was saying a couple weeks ago, which I know you talked about as well. We don't have a trigger right now to review wages, benefits, any of that, where, unless an individual comes to us with a situation or whatever. I think we need to be well acquainted with our handbook. And I think we need to be well acquainted with our policy. So at any rate, I just feel like there are just too many things to be done to approach everything at the full board level. And I think there's value in, for instance, I think evaluations was one of the requests that administration would want to look at. So we need, somebody to sit down and say, where are we with our evaluations procedure? I know we've gotten reports on it. How is that working? Do we have any other recommendations for it or whatever? There's just a lot going on that I think can't get to a bi-monthly board meeting.
Yes, Mrs. Fee?
I would support reconstituting the Personnel Committee in some shape or form. I think that Mrs. Randall's correct that there are a lot of topics that need to be addressed, and I think it is important to have board input into that for the administration at an earlier level than it would be if it came before the board once everything was done. I do have a question just procedurally. This is different than what we've had before. Does there need to be a board vote to establish this committee and the outline that you have presented to us today?
I don't think there needs to be a board vote on it. What I think, well, by policy, the board president can, is immediately after the organization, as soon after the organizational meeting, appoint people to standing committees. Or they can create, the board president can create ad hoc committees, or the superintendent can create it with board approval. So, that being said, I would say...
Where does this fall into that, I guess, is my question, because I agree completely with what you said, but I'm not sure exactly where this fits.
I don't know either. I think it can be just, this is the role that we're going to do, or we can have the board vote. To me, I guess I'm not overly concerned one way or the other. If the general consensus of the board is they'd like to vote on this as the roles for it, I would certainly be fine with that, and maybe that sends a stronger message about the role of that committee as well. There's no groundwork or policy that says this has to be voted on or doesn't. It could be the roles and the accepted roles of the committee, or it could be voted on as well.
Well, again, I do think that it would be beneficial to the district, and perhaps I would go so far as to say it's necessary, because there are so many items that need to be addressed, and I think it would be highly inefficient to try to do that with the full board. So I would support reconstituting the Personnel Committee.
Mr. Droz, did you have any questions? Do you know, we're forging new ground. Do you know if the teachers will be operating in a small group, or, I know Mr. Hancher is the new leader of the teaching faculty, and he has served as chair of the WEA in the past. He's a teacher at Jefferson School, a very fine gentleman. But are they going through some of the same questions we're going through? Do you know?
I don't know what they're going through, but I just know that the only thing that can be negotiated is base wages, and that could come out as simple as we paid $30 million for wages, and we can negotiate the CPIU of 2%, so the maximum that they can request through negotiations would be $600,000 increase, and the board would have a stance and say, we're either going to say 0 or anywhere between 0 and 6%, you can't offer more, or 600,000, whatever the CPIU is, and then it comes to impasse. So it's, the role is completely been reduced. Unless the legislation comes out or the ruling from WERC that base wages is more complicated than that it's on the individual basis, and each person's individual base salary has to be negotiated in a different manner, and we don't know that. We're only assuming that it's not going to be as complicated, because that was the intent. But that's the only type of thing we can actually sit down at the table with the association and discuss related to negotiations.
Okay. Is there, yes, Mr. Croner?
Is my recollection, I don't remember the exact policy language, that the board president can establish a standing committee and name the members subject to the approval of the board. So I think the board needs to approve it in some form. Perhaps Mr. Channing can check on that, or we could take a short break to establish that before we move forward. I see the need for this. My concern is that the board had committee organization before that didn't seem to suit the board at that time. So I'm not sure if this can be structured differently to make it more effective. If it can, then I would be in favor of moving forward. One of the issues that I don't quite understand is the procedural functions for this committee. Many committees receive proposals, and then the committee votes on whether they recommend it to the full board for approval or not. Is that something that this committee would do as well?
Yes.
So it wouldn't move forward unless it had the recommendation of the committee?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, it would have to have the support of the committee to bring something forward. If we bring a recommendation and we don't have support at the committee level, it'd be pretty challenging to try to bring it to the full board and get support for it. And I think that's, yeah, I can't think of anything I've ever done in the committee where I would take it forward without the support of the committee.
And I lost my train of thought there. It is going to require that board members accept a different view on how we operate on these policy matters, because in the past, even though we were working through contracts during the negotiation discussions, we were able to meet as a full board in executive session and discuss various options and each express our own opinions and decide, you know, we might have options this wide to begin with, and we would narrow the options that we wanted to move forward with in negotiations. And board members would be giving up that opportunity to participate in the initial discussion phase of what are the parameters around the various issues that we want to discuss and how do we want to narrow it before we go forward. So it is going to be different. The way I see it is board members in some sense are giving up the ability to participate in a more general discussion of some of these issues, and that it will take place at the committee level. So the opportunity is that hopefully board members will be able to have those open discussions again if it comes back to the whole board. I'm not sure how that's going to work, though.
It's going to be different because you can't discuss in exec session, even at the committee level, a lot of those things. And I'm not sure if that's what you were saying,
but we could still discuss them now, even at a session like this. I mean, we
Correct.
have to.
And I think that's going to have to be discussed if a recommendation from a committee comes forward on, let's just throw out sick leave. I think we're going to have 7 members of the board that are going to certainly share their opinions on how that should operate, but hopefully we can have enough research to help make informed decisions for everybody.
My only concern about some of the specific recommendations is like the first 2. Number 1, review recommendations of administrative regarding staffing at all levels, except the annual staffing request which shall be presented to the full board. I've been trying to take very seriously the board approach of policy governance, and the board has normally not been offering opinions on decisions you make for staffing, such at the level that this committee would be working on here. So I'm just curious if you see that as departure from our normal operating procedure regarding our participation in your staffing decisions.
I think it would be No, I don't see it as a different level. I think it's probably more discussion related. If I look at it and say, what is it for staffing? It's almost a financial piece before we would, it's almost a budget piece. When I look and say, for example, teachers at the high school currently are teaching 5 of 7 classes. If there was a recommendation to, or a decision to go to 6 of 7, what impact would that have in trying to get some feedback before we would make that kind of decision? I think that's where this committee could help and offer some perspective from a board level perspective before we go down that path. But as far as, it's not saying that they would make recommendations. Now, there might be an example when you asked, would there be support? You know, I think we'd have to have pause if we had 3 members of a committee saying, that's a problem, or I think you're gonna have a problem, because ultimately my thought process is, okay, we're gonna present the budget to the board, and it includes money shifted from staffing levels of a teaching load into salary that might not go over so well. So I think that's kind of advisory as well, to where it wouldn't necessarily be just a strict recommendation coming from a committee, but I think it's an opportunity for the administration to get feedback from a board perspective too, of a committee perspective.
Yeah, I guess at this point, I would be willing to give it a try. I'm not sure yet, having not, thought about it, but considering the history of how committees worked in the past, I'm not sure how it will work, but I know that because things are different now, maybe it has a better chance of success. So.
And I'm not sure either. You know, it's something I just think there's a gap, and I think it can help us.
As I listen to you, Mr. Croner, I think of the scheduling committee. There's so many unknowns in that at this time. That will be a factor that will come into the discussion as we move forward. It seems like a puzzle to me right now, but I know the answers will start coming. When again might we hear a report on the scheduling committee?
I don't know the exact date. They just actually took another visit last week of another school district, or 2 weeks ago, I believe it was. So we're working through it, and there's going to be 2 different looks, middle school and high school, but certainly a recommendation before the end of the school year for the following year. Not for this next year, but for the following year.
So we aren't going to see any change, obviously, this school year, but we could for 12-13, or are you saying 13-14?
13-14 is when I expect it, but the recommendation to be done this school year. So the staff development and all the changes with scheduling, whatever it might be that we go to, can be implemented. And I think the key thing, no matter what we do, if it needs and requires professional development, that we can do that, so. If I can just let me read the language from that policy in the bylaws, and you guys can decide how you want to approach it. In my interpretation. This is exact language, not my interpretation, put it that way. The President is authorized to appoint as soon after the annual reorganizational meeting as practicable members of the board to standing committees where they shall serve a term of 1 year. Ad hoc committees may be created and changed at any time by the president or the superintendent with approval of the board. Members of the ad hoc committees shall serve until the committee is discharged. I look at it and say the president has the authority without approval of the board. Is that correct? That's how I read it.
Yes. That's how we've operated, too.
I'm not going to commit to that at this point until I have a chance to sit down and read it more carefully.
Well, I think in past practice, we have had a discussion of the committee, what is the committee's purpose, what will they be doing, how many members, who are the members, and we have had a thorough discussion of it, and I think it's necessary to have a vote, even if maybe we'll interpret something different. I think it is important. It's a very important time for our district, for our employees, and if this is the vehicle by which we're going to thoroughly investigate and examine a lot of these topics, then I think we should officially organize it and maintain it that way. My question is, are there 3 board members on this committee? Not including the president.
No, 3 total.
3 total, okay.
Yes, Mrs. Randall.
You know, we do have some success, record of success in committee work. And our most recent bargaining sessions, I think, is a good example of that. And it's going to be the responsibility of everybody, whether you're on the committee or outside of it on the full board, to make sure that the full board does have all the information. It doesn't necessarily preclude it, but we did give a level of trust and responsibility to the individuals that we asked to be present at negotiations. So it's going to involve trust, it's going to involve responsibility, and if we can't do that, it wouldn't be successful. So, you know, we can try it. If it doesn't work, well, then it doesn't work. But truly, there are just too many issues that need to be addressed right now and that we need to keep on top of. So, and to deal with them all with 7 individuals, it's not realistic. For anybody to think that they would not be able to approach a person on the committee, or to have, even if a recommendation comes forward that either you disagree with or you want to know why wasn't this option considered, that discussion is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen, just like when we got reports back from negotiations. So I think that's a model that we can follow and that can be effective for us. And the reason for doing that the last time was to avoid all of this, okay, we negotiated, we're coming back to all 7 of you, and all of these things happened, and nobody had an opportunity to kind of condense it, ask some questions at the time, and so on. So I really think it's needed. I think it's very necessary.
To piggyback on to what you're saying, I think it requires careful, respectful listening. And there's nothing wrong with disagreement, because out of that comes growth and decision-making. And it's important that we do get all the questions out on the table to move forward.
Why don't I bring it back at the next meeting for a vote? If there's a couple of questions about process and that taking place, why don't we just take a vote on it at the next meeting? We can schedule it for a vote and establish it that way.
Yes.
I am in agreement for a vote. I think if the board wants to commission this action, then we should commission this action. And obviously, we need to all do our homework. That is not the issue here. We just want to make sure that we all understand how it's organized, what are the topics that, what are the general topics, and how will that discussion occur. I'm assuming, but I don't know, I could probably ask this at the next meeting that you bring it back, but will it be the same thing where you present in a report and then at the next meeting we vote on it? Will that be the course of action?
Or the Personnel Committee?
For Personnel Committee, yes. Will it be the same sort of process that we use in our normal board operations? There'll be a report on some recommendation, and then at the following, with discussion, and then at the following meeting, there will be a vote.
You mean as far as the committee operations?
Correct.
I think that's up to the committee too, certainly. I mean, generally, that's the way you're going to operate, to try to give information, be able to study, come back, discuss it again. But in some cases, that might not be needed.
And I think
Committee
that
feels that
comes
way.
from the group. If there's enough understanding and agreement, we can direct that the vote be taken. Can it, or do we have to always post that there's going to be a vote?
There's never going to be a vote of the committee.
Okay.
Committees can't vote.
Right.
So you wouldn't post that. It's going to be discussion, and there's consensus or there's not consensus.
Okay. Yes, Ann?
I would like to point out that Dr. Ertl said that the committee would start with really a committee of the whole, where there would be an exec session, where there would be discussion of what the committee, the subcommittee of the board was allowed to do. which I think would address a lot of what you're talking about, Mrs. Muehlfeld. So I think that that's sort of built into what the proposal is, at least that's what I heard. I would also suggest that as our policies give the president of the board the authority to constitute committees, that Mrs. Weber take a look at that policy and decide prior to setting the next agenda whether or not it needs to be on for a vote. I know Dr. Ertl said, why don't I bring it back? But it really is, I think, within Mrs. Weber's purview as president of the board to decide whether that is something that needs to be on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Sorry. Well, let me point out that there's a fourth bullet point on our handout here that basically discusses the executive session, but in the parameters of negotiation with employee groups. So I would not assume that to mean other topics that the Personnel Committee might cover. And my preference would be, yes, that Mrs. Weber, as our president, consider how to bring this back for the board, but I would like a board vote to convene this committee.
Is there further comment? Okay, I will be discussing it with you, and we'll move forward. Thank you. Anyone else have any other comment at this point? Thank you. Is there any community comment, please? Okay, seeing none. I believe we are ready to adjourn this meeting. Following this regular meeting, the school board will will adjourn into executive session to consider a request for additional leave of absence under board policy 3430 and 3430.01 pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85 subsection L subsection F to consider a personnel issue related to financial, medical, social, and personal histories of specific persons, which, if discussed in public, would be likely to have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of any person referred to in such. Is there a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Randall?
Yep.
And is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please, Mrs. Galante.
Mrs. Fee?
Yes.
Mr. Giroux?
Yes.
Mr. Croner?
Yes.
Mrs. Muehlfeld?
Yes.
Mrs. Randall?
Yes.
Mrs. Weber?
Yes, and we'll take 5 minutes and then reconvene. Is that enough time?